I should have known better. Looking back now, I can't believe how naive I was, how desperately I wanted to believe that, just this once, things would be different. When my mother-in-law, Vivian Montgomery, invited me on a luxurious family vacation, I actually thought she was extending an olive branch. I had married Ethan Montgomery 3 years ago, stepping into a world of old money and deep-seated privilege, a world where my self-made success meant nothing. To them, I was an outsider, a woman who worked for her wealth instead of inheriting it. But despite everything, I tried. I attended their lavish charity galas, dressed in designer gowns I bought myself. I nodded along as they discussed their summer homes, their trust funds, their disdain for corporate jobs, which, coincidentally, was exactly what I did. And through it all, I held on to the hope that one day, I'd be seen as part of the family. That hope flickered to life the evening Vivian called. "Ashley, dear," she purred, her voice dripping with the kind of artificial warmth she reserved for cocktail parties and photographers. "We're spending a week at the Alpine Heights Resort in Aspen for Christmas. I'd love for you to join us." I nearly dropped my phone. Vivian had never invited me anywhere before. Holidays with the Montgomerys were an exclusive affair. Ethan always went, while I stayed behind, pretending it didn't hurt. But this time I was included. I hesitated. "Are you sure? I mean, I don't want to intrude." "Nonsense," she interrupted smoothly. "Your family." Those words. Your family. They landed in my chest like a promise, like an overdue validation of my place among them. Ethan walked into the room as I clutched my phone, my face a mixture of confusion and hope. "Come on, babe. It'll be fun," he said, pressing a quick kiss to my forehead. "Mom's really trying." I wanted to believe that. God, I wanted to believe that so badly. So, against my instincts, I agreed. 2 hours later, I was on my laptop, finalizing the booking. The Montgomerys always traveled in excess, so a single suite wouldn't do. Vivian wanted the best, 4 private suites at one of the most exclusive resorts in Aspen. I footed the bill, transferring over $15,000 without a second thought. If this trip was the price of finally belonging, I was willing to pay it. I should have known better. The morning we left for Aspen, I woke up before my alarm, too anxious to sleep. I had picked out the perfect outfit, an elegant yet understated cashmere sweater, sleek black jeans, and a delicate diamond necklace Ethan had given me on our wedding day. It wasn't about impressing them. It was about showing them I belonged. The moment I pulled up to the Montgomery estate, my stomach twisted. Vivian was already outside, wrapped in a pristine white coat, her manicured fingers adjusting her sunglasses as she surveyed me with the same polite detachment she always had. Beside her stood Celeste, Ethan's younger sister, draped in a fur stole that probably cost more than my first car. "Good morning, Ashley," Vivian said, her tone airy. "I trust you didn't pack too much? The jet is already quite full." I forced a smile. "Just the essentials." Celeste smirked. "Oh, sweetie, you say that, but last time, you showed up with that, what was it? A Samsonite suitcase?" She giggled, like my choice of luggage was a hilarious inside joke. "Tell me you upgraded this time." I swallowed the bitter response on my tongue. This was fine. They were including me now. That's what mattered. Ethan finally joined us, clapping his hand on my shoulder. "Let's go," he said cheerfully, completely oblivious to the tension radiating around us. 2 hours later, we touched down in Aspen. The air was crisp, the mountains blanketed in snow, and for a moment, as I stepped off the jet, I allowed myself to believe that maybe, just maybe, this week would be different. I should have known better. From the moment we arrived at Alpine Heights, the cracks in the illusion began to show. Vivian was all smiles, graciously accepting glasses of champagne from the staff as we checked in. But when the receptionist turned to me and said, "Ms. Montgomery, we have your payment details on file for all 4 suites," Vivian cut in smoothly. Yes, Ashley was so generous to handle the booking," she said, flashing her perfect smile before turning back to the receptionist. Now, I assume our usual butler is assigned to us? I frowned. Generous? I hadn't offered to pay for them. I had assumed Ethan and I were paying for our suite. No one had mentioned I was covering the entire trip. Before I could process it, Celeste looped her arm through mine, her diamond bracelets jingling. Ashley, darling, you must book a spa treatments for tomorrow. My shoulders are a mess after that flight. I started, but Vivian was already handing me a glossy brochure. We'll do the premium package, she decided. Just charge it to the room, will you? I looked at Ethan, expecting him to step in. He didn't. I should have known better. That night, as I sat in the corner of the penthouse suite, watching the Montgomerys laugh over expensive wine I had unknowingly paid for, a realization settled in my chest like a stone. I wasn't here as a daughter-in-law. I wasn't here as family. I was here as their wallet. And something about that realization made my blood turn cold. Have you ever been used by someone who pretended to care about you? Comment 111 if you know that pain. Looking back, the red flags had always been there. They weren't subtle, either. They were glaring, waving in my face, warning me from the very start. And yet, I ignored them. I convinced myself that love was enough, that patience would bridge the gap between me and the Montgomerys. I had no idea, back then, that I was setting myself up for years of slow, humiliating rejection. I met Ethan when I was 21, a fresh-faced intern at an investment firm in Manhattan. He was charming, with an easy confidence that made people gravitate toward him. We met at a networking event, him in an expensive tailored suit, me in the only professional dress I could afford at the time. I still remember the way his eyes lingered on me that night, a look of curiosity rather than dismissal. It was intoxicating. Dating Ethan felt like stepping into a world I'd only seen in magazines. Weekend getaways to the Hamptons, dinner at Michelin-starred restaurants, invitations to high society galas where everyone seemed effortlessly glamorous. I felt like Cinderella at the ball, except there was no fairy godmother, no glass slipper, only me, trying desperately to fit in. The first time I met his mother, Vivian, I knew she disapproved of me. She was polite, of course. The Montgomerys were always polite. But there was something in the way she smiled, thin, rehearsed, as if she were humoring me rather than welcoming me. She's different, I overheard her telling one of her friends at a gala one evening, not realizing I was just a few feet away. She works for her money. She said it like it was a disease. Celeste, Ethan's younger sister, didn't bother with subtlety. She barely acknowledged me when we were introduced, her gaze flicking over my dress with the practiced eye of someone who had spent a lifetime judging others. Later that night, I heard her laugh as she whispered something to her friends, something about how I clearly didn't come from money. Ethan brushed it off. They just need time to warm up to you, he said, kissing my forehead. They'll come around. So, I tried. I tried so hard. I made myself small at family gatherings, careful never to say anything that might be considered out of place. I listened to them complain about the struggles of managing trust funds while ignoring the fact that I was working 80-hour weeks to build my career. I bought thoughtful, expensive gifts for birthdays and holidays, hoping that if I just gave enough, sacrificed enough, I would eventually be accepted. But the Montgomerys were a closed circle, and I was standing on the outside, pressing my hands against the glass, waiting for an invitation that would never come. I remember Celeste's engagement party. A grand, extravagant event at a private vineyard in Napa Valley. I wasn't invited. I found out about it the same way everyone else did, through Instagram. A perfect photo of Celeste in a designer gown, holding up a champagne flute, captioned, "The most magical night ever." Hundreds of comments flooded in, congratulating her, admiring her dress, marveling at the venue. And there I was, sitting in my apartment, staring at my phone, waiting for Ethan to call. He didn't. When he finally came home 2 days later, I confronted him. "Why didn't you tell me?" His expression was unreadable. "I didn't think you'd want to go." I laughed, an empty, hollow sound. You didn't think I'd want to go to your sister's engagement party? He sighed, running a hand through his hair. Ashley, it was a family event. A family event. And I wasn't family. But I didn't leave. I swallowed my pride, pushed down the sting of rejection, and kept trying. I kept telling myself that if I just proved my loyalty, if I showed them I was worthy, they would finally see me as one of their own. When Ethan's father, Richard, made a series of bad investment choices and nearly lost millions, I stepped in. With my financial expertise, I helped him recover his losses, offering advice and connecting him with people who could help. I never asked for credit. I just wanted to prove myself. But it didn't matter. Thanksgiving rolled around, and once again, I found out through social media that they were celebrating in their family estate in Maine. Without me. I stared at the pictures, Vivian laughing at the dinner table, Celeste posing beside a perfectly golden turkey, Ethan standing between them, grinning like he belonged. When I confronted him, he barely looked up from his laptop. It was just a small gathering, he said, as if that made it better. As if my absence wasn't glaring. Still, I stayed. I kept giving, kept sacrificing, kept hoping. When Ethan lost his job for 6 months, I paid our rent without question. I covered our vacations, our date nights, his car payments. When Celeste had a destination wedding in Italy, I bought us first-class tickets, thinking that this, finally, would be the moment they saw me as family. It wasn't. I spent the entire wedding seated at the far end of the reception hall, surrounded by distant relatives I had never met. When I tried to talk to Vivian, she smiled politely, then turned to someone else as if I weren't even there. And Ethan? He barely noticed. That was the worst part. Not the exclusion, not the whispers, not the way they made me feel like an outsider in my own marriage. It was the realization that Ethan wasn't fighting for me. That maybe, deep down, he agreed with them. That maybe, I had never truly belonged in his world at all. And yet, I still said yes when Vivian invited me to Aspen. I still transferred the money, still held on to the fragile hope that this time would be different. Because after years of trying, I couldn't accept the truth. That no matter how much I gave, no matter how much I sacrificed, I would never be enough for them. And I would never be one of them. Have you ever sacrificed so much for someone, only to feel like it meant nothing? Comment 222 below. The moment we arrived at the resort, I knew something was off. It was in the way Vivian surveyed the lobby as if she owned the place, the way Celeste adjusted her designer sunglasses and barely acknowledged me, the way Ethan fell seamlessly back into the rhythm of his family, as if I were just another accessory in the background. I tried to ignore the feeling creeping up my spine, the quiet whisper in my mind telling me I had made a mistake coming here. The Alpine Heights Resort was breathtaking, a masterpiece nestled in the heart of Aspen's snow-covered peaks. Grand chandeliers cast a golden glow over the marble floors, and massive floor-to-ceiling windows framed the glittering mountains beyond. The air smelled of cedarwood and expensive perfume, a place designed for luxury, exclusivity, and people who never checked their bank accounts before swiping their cards. As we checked in, a uniformed concierge approached. "Ms. Montgomery," she said, looking at me. "We have your payment details on file for all 4 suites. Would you like to place any additional charges under the same card?" I hesitated. Before I could respond, Vivian gave a dismissive wave of her hand. Yes, just put everything on her account." She turned to me, flashing a practiced smile. "Darling, you don't mind covering the spa treatments, do you? It would mean so much." It wasn't a request. It was an expectation. I glanced at Ethan, waiting for him to interject, to remind his mother that I wasn't some endless source of funds. He didn't. He was already pulling out his phone, checking messages as if the conversation didn't concern him at all. I swallowed hard. "Sure," I murmured, forcing a smile. Vivian patted my shoulder like I was an obedient pet. "Lovely." I told myself not to overthink it. Maybe it was just this one thing. Maybe they would at least say thank you. They didn't. That afternoon, Celeste looped her arm through mine and dragged me into an exclusive boutique attached to the resort. The kind of place where price tags were hidden, because if you had to ask, you didn't belong there. "You have to help me pick something for New Year's," she said, flipping through racks of dresses. I barely had a chance to answer before she was piling designer bags, coats, and shoes into my arms. The sales assistant, sensing an easy commission, hovered nearby with an eager smile. Celeste barely glanced at the growing pile. "Oh, just put it on your card. We'll settle later." I froze. "Excuse me?" She laughed like I had made a joke. "Come on, Ashley. You make good money, don't you?" She turned back to the mirror, admiring herself in a gold sequin dress. "Besides, Ethan told me you'd handle it." Something inside me cracked. I looked at Ethan, who was standing near the entrance, scrolling through his phone, oblivious, or pretending to be. I set the bags down carefully, like I was handling something fragile. "I'm not paying for this." My voice was calm, but firm. Celeste blinked at me, then let out a sharp, condescending laugh. "God, you don't have to be so dramatic. I was going to Venmo you later." We both knew that was a lie. I turned to Ethan, my frustration boiling over. "Did you tell her I'd pay?" He finally looked up, shifting uncomfortably. "Babe, it's just for the trip. Don't make a scene. Don't make a scene." That was Ethan's go-to response whenever his family pushed me too far. He had said it at Thanksgiving when I found out they'd gone to Maine without me. He had said it after Celeste's wedding when I was seated with strangers instead of family. And now, he was saying it again, as if my emotions were an inconvenience, something to be swallowed down for the sake of keeping the peace. I turned back to Celeste, who was watching me with amusement, like I was an animal performing a trick for her entertainment. "Put it on your own card," I said, then walked out of the store. Dinner that night was held at the resort's most exclusive restaurant, a place where even the cheapest appetizer cost more than my monthly grocery bill. I barely spoke through the meal, pushing my food around my plate while the Montgomerys laughed and sipped their wine. Ethan sat beside me, completely at ease. It was like the boutique incident had never happened. Like it was normal for his sister to treat me like a walking bank account. The final straw came when the check arrived. A crisp white envelope placed gently on the table. A bill totaling $4,500. Vivian slid it toward me with a sickly sweet smile. "You don't mind, do you, dear?" I stared at the bill, then at her, then at Ethan. He avoided my gaze, swirling the wine in his glass like it was suddenly the most interesting thing in the world. I looked around the table. No one spoke. No one protested. They all just expected me to comply, to do what I had always done, to give without question, without limits, without receiving anything in return. That was it. That was the moment I saw them for what they truly were. Users. Leeches. Parasites dressed in designer labels. I felt my pulse pounding in my ears. My hands trembled under the table, not with fear, but with the sheer force of my realization. For years, I had convinced myself that if I just kept trying, if I just gave enough, sacrificed enough, they would finally accept me. But they never would. Because I wasn't a person to them. I was a resource. A convenience. And I had let them do it. I exhaled slowly, setting my napkin down. Then I smiled. A small, knowing smile. And I reached for my wallet. For the first time that night, Ethan finally looked at me, sensing that something was different. But he was too late. Because I wasn't about to let them win. What would you have done in my shoes? Comment 333 and let me know. I didn't argue. I didn't refuse. Instead, I smiled. Of course, I said, reaching into my purse and pulling out my card. I held it between my fingers, letting the moment stretch just a little longer than necessary, long enough to watch the satisfaction flicker across Vivian's face, long enough to catch Celeste's smirk and the way Ethan sighed in relief, as if I had just done my duty. Then I handed it over. The waiter took it without hesitation, disappearing toward the register. Around me, the conversation picked back up as if nothing had happened, as if I had just done what was expected of me. But inside, something had shifted. I wasn't angry anymore. Anger was loud, messy, emotional. I had felt it earlier, when Celeste tried to throw her shopping spree on my card. I had felt it when Vivian had so effortlessly assigned me the role of family sponsor. But now? Now, I was calm. Clear. Because I finally understood. They were never going to accept me. They were never going to respect me. No amount of money, patience, or sacrifices would change that. I wasn't a daughter-in-law. I wasn't even a person to them. I was just a wallet, one they expected to open whenever they wanted. But they had underestimated me. I had spent years trying to earn my place in their family. Now, I was done. And I wasn't leaving quietly. That night, while they lounged on the balcony of our penthouse suite, sipping champagne and laughing over inside jokes that never included me, I got to work. First, I took back my money. I logged into my banking app and reversed the $15,000 I had paid for our stay. Since the booking had been made under my name, the resort had no reason to deny my request. My account balance refreshed instantly, the numbers shifting in my favor. Next, I made a call. William answered on the second ring. "Ashley," he said, his voice warm with familiarity. "I was wondering when you'd reach out." William and I had met in college, back when neither of us had money or influence. We had studied together, helped each other through all-nighters, and stayed in touch over the years. Now, he was the general manager of Alpine Heights, running one of the most exclusive resorts in Aspen. And right now, I needed a favor. "I need you to cancel my reservations," I said, my voice steady. There was a pause. "Then, all of them?" "Yes," I said, glancing toward the balcony where the Montgomerys lounged, oblivious. "All of them." Another pause. Then, a slow chuckle. "You got it." By sunrise, my revenge was in motion. The next morning, I took my time getting ready. I wanted to enjoy this. I selected a sleek black turtleneck and tailored wool trousers, pulling my hair into a smooth ponytail. I added simple gold studs, a spritz of perfume, and just enough makeup to highlight my features. I looked composed. Collected. Untouchable. I stepped out of the suite and made my way downstairs to the lobby, where I found William waiting for me by the concierge desk. He was dressed impeccably, his suit crisp, his expression unreadable. "Everything is taken care of," he said, handing me a printed copy of the cancellation confirmation. "They'll find out soon." I took the paper, my lips curling into a smile. "Perfect." "Need anything else?" he asked, amusement glinting in his eyes. I thought about it for a moment. Then, I shook my head. "No," I said. "I think that's enough. For now." I returned to the suite to find the Montgomerys gathered in the living room, discussing their plans for the day. Celeste was scrolling through spa treatments on her phone. Vivian was flipping through a glossy travel magazine. Ethan was lounging on the couch, completely at ease. None of them had any idea what was coming. I took a seat in an armchair by the window, sipping the coffee I had picked up from the cafe downstairs. I watched them, soaking in the moment, knowing that in just a little while, their world would start to crack. And I would be the one holding the hammer. A knock sounded at the door. One of the hotel staff stepped inside, glancing at me before turning toward Vivian. "Mrs. Montgomery," he said politely, "I'm terribly sorry, but there seems to be an issue with your reservation." Vivian frowned, setting down her magazine. "What kind of issue?" The staff member hesitated. "Your suites have been cancelled." Silence. For a moment, no one reacted. Then Celeste let out a sharp laugh. "That's ridiculous," she said, flipping her hair. "Obviously, there's been a mistake." Vivian's expression tightened. "I'd like to speak with management." The staff member nodded. "Of course." He stepped aside, and William entered the room, his presence commanding. "Good morning," he said smoothly. "I'm afraid there is no mistake." Vivian's smile was stiff. "We have reservations for the week." William nodded. "You did. But the guest who made those reservations cancelled them." Vivian's head snapped toward Ethan. "You cancelled our rooms?" Ethan looked just as confused as she was. "No." And then, as if a switch had been flipped, every single head in the room turned toward me. I set down my coffee. Slowly, deliberately. Then I met Vivian's gaze and smiled. "Why?" she asked, her voice sharp with disbelief. I tilted my head. "Why not?" Vivian's mouth opened, then closed. Celeste was still staring at me, her phone forgotten in her lap. Ethan sat up straighter, his brows furrowing. "You can't just do that," Vivian said, her voice rising. I arched a brow. "I can, actually. The reservations were in my name. My money paid for them." I let that settle before adding, "and I decided I didn't want to pay any more." Celeste scoffed. "God, you're so dramatic." I turned to her, my expression impassive. "Am I?" Ethan stood then, his voice low. "Ashley, let's talk about this." I met his gaze, searching for something, regret, understanding, anything that showed he realized what he had done. But all I saw was frustration. Frustration that I had broken the script, that I wasn't playing my part. And that was all I needed to see. I stood, smoothing down my sweater. "I've already arranged for a car to take me back to the airport," I said. "I'll be gone in an hour." Vivian let out an exasperated laugh. "You can't be serious. It's Christmas." I turned to her, my smile unwavering. "Yes, and I decided to give myself a gift this year." "And what would that be?" she sneered. I picked up my purse and adjusted the strap over my shoulder. "Freedom." I walked past them without another word, stepping into the hallway and letting the door swing shut behind me. As I made my way toward the elevator, I exhaled slowly, feeling a weight I hadn't even realized I was carrying finally lift. They had used me. Over and over again, they had drained me, taken advantage of my kindness, my patience, my love. But I wasn't their ATM anymore. I was done. Have you ever had to stay silent while planning your next move? Comment 444 if you know that feeling. Breakfast at Alpine Heights was a spectacle of wealth and indulgence. The kind of place where perfectly plated eggs Benedict and fresh fruit were served with glasses of Veuve Clicquot, where conversations were hushed but dripping with status and self-importance. I arrived at the dining hall a few minutes after the Montgomerys, deliberately taking my time. The air smelled of roasted coffee and warm pastries, but beneath the comforting aroma, tension lingered. I could feel it before I even reached the table. Vivian sat at the head, flipping through the breakfast menu with the same detached elegance she always carried, as if the world bent to her will. Celeste scrolled through her phone, one manicured nail tapping against the screen in irritation. Ethan was stirring his coffee absent-mindedly, still half asleep. None of them looked at me as I pulled out my chair and settled in. They didn't know yet. I sipped my coffee, waiting. Vivian was the first to break the silence. She glanced up, her lips curving into something that almost resembled amusement. "Darling, be a dear and check on the spa appointments for this afternoon, would you?" I set my coffee down and tilted my head. "The spa appointments?" "Yes, the full premium package," she said, waving her hand as if it were a trivial expense. "Celeste and I have massages scheduled before the Christmas Eve gala." I took another slow sip of coffee, letting the moment stretch, letting them think everything was still under control. Then, as if on cue, a sharp voice interrupted. "Excuse me, Mrs. Montgomery?" Vivian's expression tightened as she turned, coming face to face with a well-dressed man in a tailored navy suit. His name tag gleamed under the morning light, James Hart, Guest Services Manager. Her brows furrowed. "Yes?" James offered a polite, professional smile. "I'm terribly sorry to interrupt your breakfast, but there seems to be an issue with your reservation. Vivian blinked. What are you talking about? James hesitated just enough to build suspense. Then, with the kind of practiced precision only someone in luxury hospitality could manage, he said, "It appears your reservation has been cancelled." Silence fell over the table. Vivian let out a sharp, disbelieving laugh. "That's impossible. Ashley paid for everything." James nodded. "Did she?" He turned slightly, glancing in my direction. "Because according to our records, the cardholder reversed the charges." I took another sip of coffee, savoring the moment. Celeste's phone slipped from her fingers, clattering against the table. "What?" Ethan finally looked up from his coffee, his brows furrowing in confusion. "Ashley?" I met his gaze, calm and collected. "Yes?" His voice was lower now, cautious. "Did you cancel our reservations?" I leaned back in my chair, crossing my legs as I placed my coffee cup gently onto the saucer. "Oh, that?" "Yes. I did." Vivian paled. "You did what?" Celeste's face twisted in outrage. "You can't do that." I arched a brow. "Actually, I can." Vivian straightened in her chair, her carefully composed expression slipping, revealing the sheer disbelief beneath it. "You paid for this trip." I smiled. "I did. And then I decided I didn't feel like paying anymore." Ethan pushed his chair back, his voice hushed but urgent. "Ashley, let's talk about this." "Oh, now you want to talk?" I said, tilting my head. "That's funny. Last night, when your mother slid the check toward me, you didn't have much to say." His mouth opened, then closed. Vivian's face darkened. "Do you realize what you've done?" I let out a short laugh. "Oh, I know exactly what I've done." Celeste looked like she was about to explode. "You're just jealous because—" "I'm done," I interrupted, my voice quiet but firm. "I'm done playing the role you assigned to me. I'm done being the outsider, desperately trying to fit in. And I am done paying for the privilege of being treated like an inconvenience." Vivian inhaled sharply. "You ungrateful little—" "Careful," I said, my voice like ice. "You don't want to make a scene, do you?" Vivian's lips pressed into a thin line. James, still standing there with perfect professionalism, cleared his throat. "I understand this is unexpected, but unfortunately, without an active reservation, we will need you to vacate the suites by noon." Celeste gasped. Noon? Vivian's nostrils flared. "Absolutely not. We'll book them again." She reached for her phone. "I'll just—" James shook his head. "I'm afraid that won't be possible." She froze. "Excuse me?" "The resort is at full capacity for the holiday," he said smoothly. "There are no available rooms." It was glorious. Celeste made a strangled noise, her face flushing. "Mom, fix this." Vivian shot up from her chair, turning to Ethan. "Call your father." Ethan hesitated. "I don't. Call him, Ethan reached for his phone, pressing it to his ear. A long silence stretched. Then his face dropped. "What?" Vivian demanded. Ethan swallowed. "He's in Europe. He said he can't do anything." Vivian's lips parted slightly, the reality of the situation finally sinking in. No rooms. No favors. No quick solution. And I sat back in my chair, watching them unravel, sipping my mimosa like it was the finest thing I had ever tasted. "You," Vivian hissed, turning back to me. "You planned this." I didn't even bother denying it. Vivian's hands clenched at her sides, her breath unsteady. "You are not part of this family." I smiled, the weight lifting from my chest. "I know." And with that, I stood, smoothing out my sweater. "You all have a lovely holiday." Then, without another word, I turned and walked away. Hashtag hashtag hashtag. I left the Montgomerys behind in that grand dining hall, their world crumbling around them, their privilege unable to save them for the first time. By the time I checked out and arranged for a private car back to the airport, my phone had started buzzing. Ethan. Vivian. Even Celeste. I ignored them all. By the time my plane took off, I felt lighter than I had in years. By the time I landed, I knew I would never look back. Do you think they got what they deserved? Comment 555 if you felt that justice was served. Ethan ran after me as I left the resort. Ashley, wait. His voice was frantic, breathless, like he had just realized what was happening. But I didn't stop. I didn't even slow down. I just kept walking, my heels crunching against the snow-covered pavement, my heart beating steadily in my chest. Ashley, come on, he pleaded, his footsteps closing the distance between us. Just talk to me. I turned, finally, but not because I wanted to hear what he had to say. I just needed to see it. The look on his face when he realized that this time I wasn't going to fold. That I wasn't going to let him smooth things over with an apology wrapped in empty promises. Why? I asked, tilting my head. So you can ask me to pay for your Uber home? His mouth opened. Then closed. And that silence told me everything. I smiled, but there was no warmth in it. That's what I thought. I turned back around, stepping into the waiting car. I didn't slam the door. I didn't need to. I just shut it with quiet finality, letting it click into place like the last puzzle piece of my escape. As the car pulled away, I watched him grow smaller in the rearview mirror, standing there in the cold, looking as lost as he had left me feeling for years. And then I looked away. That night, I blocked his number. And his family's. The next morning, I called my lawyer. Before the week was over, I had filed for divorce. For the first time in years, I felt free. At first, the silence was strange. For years, my life had been filled with constant noise, the weight of expectations, the undercurrent of condescension, the exhaustion of trying to be enough for people who would never see my worth. I had lived with that static for so long that, in the absence of it, I didn't quite know what to do. But as the days stretched into weeks, I started to fill that silence with something else. Peace. I moved out of the penthouse I had shared with Ethan. The place was beautiful, but it had never really felt like mine. It was a museum of our relationship, decorated to match his family's taste, filled with furniture I hadn't picked out, art I didn't care for, and memories that no longer felt like they belonged to me. So I packed what was mine and left. I found an apartment in a quiet part of the city, smaller than what I was used to, but warm. Comfortable. A place where every decision, every piece of furniture, every framed photo, was mine. For the first time in years, I didn't have to shrink myself to fit into someone else's world. I was creating my own. Ethan tried to reach me, of course. At first, through calls and texts, each one more desperate than the last. Then through mutual friends, asking if I would at least meet him to talk. I didn't. I had spent years talking, explaining, justifying, begging to be understood. I had exhausted every word, every ounce of patience I had left. There was nothing else to say. Vivian sent an email, curt, emotionless, demanding that I reconsider the divorce because of what it would look like for their family. I didn't respond. Celeste made a passive-aggressive post on Instagram about certain people who betray family, as if I were the villain in all of this. I laughed. And then I blocked her, too. I reconnected with people I had lost along the way. Friends I had neglected because I was always too busy trying to prove myself to the Montgomerys. People who had loved me, supported me, and never once made me feel like I had to earn my place in their lives. I took myself out to dinner, sat alone in a quiet restaurant with a glass of wine and a book, and realized I didn't feel lonely. I went on morning runs in the park, letting the crisp air fill my lungs, feeling my body grow stronger, my mind clearer. I booked a solo trip to Santorini, something I had always wanted to do but had never gotten around to because the Montgomerys had always dictated where we vacationed. I stood at the edge of the caldera at sunset, watching the sky burn orange and pink, and for the first time in a long time, I felt like I was exactly where I was supposed to be. Healing wasn't instant. Some nights, I still lay awake, replaying conversations, wondering how I had let it go on for so long. There were moments when the anger resurfaced, sharp and unexpected. When I would hear a song that reminded me of Ethan, or pass a store where Celeste used to drag me on her shopping sprees, and I would feel that old frustration bubble up. But I let it come. And then I let it go. Because I was no longer carrying their weight. I had spent years believing that walking away was failure. That if I could just be better, more patient, more understanding, more useful, they would finally love me the way I had loved them. But I had been wrong. Walking away wasn't failure. It was survival. It was choosing myself. One day, months later, I was walking through the city when I spotted Ethan across the street. He didn't see me. He was sitting at an outdoor cafe, staring down at his phone, a slight frown on his face. Alone. And in that moment, I felt nothing. No anger. No sadness. No regret. Just relief. I turned the corner and kept walking, the sun warm against my face, the weight of my past finally left behind. Sometimes, the hardest thing you'll ever do is walk away from people you once loved. But sometimes, it's the only way to save yourself. Have you ever had to walk away from someone to protect yourself? Comment 666 if you've made that choice. The Montgomerys weren't family. They were frauds wearing the mask of kinship. I see that now. For years, I let myself believe that love meant endurance. That if I just gave enough patience, enough understanding, enough money, they would eventually see my worth. But love isn't something you earn through sacrifice. And family? Real family doesn't drain you. Real family doesn't treat you like a walking wallet. It took me far too long to understand that. To realize that the people who truly care for you won't demand your silence in exchange for acceptance. They won't make you prove your value through suffering. And they certainly won't expect you to fund their lifestyle while offering you nothing in return but backhanded compliments and empty smiles. I had spent so much time chasing their approval that I lost sight of the most important thing, myself. But the moment I walked away, the moment I stopped begging for a place at their table, I got something far more valuable than their validation. I got my life back. The truth is, walking away wasn't easy. It never is. We tell ourselves that cutting ties means giving up, that if we could just hold on a little longer, things will get better. But here's what I've learned: not everyone deserves a second chance. Not everyone deserves access to you. And some bridges are meant to burn. I used to believe that leaving meant losing. That if I let go, I would be left with nothing. But I was wrong. Leaving meant freedom. It meant peace. It meant finally making space for people who deserved to be in my life. And as soon as I chose myself, the weight I had been carrying for years, the exhaustion, the self-doubt, the pain, disappeared. Maybe you're watching this right now, feeling trapped in a situation where you're constantly giving and never receiving. Maybe you've been manipulated, used, or made to feel like your worth is tied to what you can provide rather than who you are. If that's you, I want you to hear this. You don't owe anyone your suffering. You don't have to prove your worth to people who refuse to see it. And you are allowed to walk away. Your peace is worth more than their approval. And when you finally choose yourself, you'll realize you were never losing them. They were losing you. Have you ever had to fight to reclaim your power? Share your story in the comments below. I want to hear from you. And if this message resonated with you, don't forget to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and share it with someone who needs to hear it. Because sometimes, the hardest thing to do is let go, but it's also the most powerful.